So many, thank you all. I'm Livia Senic, I'm the store manager of Rizzoli bookstore, and I'm extremely honored today to host this event. Our guest today actually, sorry, the time zone, today is Joel Meyerowitz. Is going to present his new expanded edition of his classic 1983 photo book, Wildflowers. He will be in conversation with Gus Powell. Thank you, Joel. You can see the book. Just few words about them. Born in the Bronx in 1938, Joel Meyerowitz is best known for his extensive street photography practice. He began capturing everyday scenes of the street of New York in 1962. About Gus Powell, born in New York in 1974, is the author of The Company of Strangers, The Lonely Ones, Family Car Trouble, and Brooklyn Brief. His work has appeared in Aperture, The New Yorker, A Public Space, and Vogue. And now, without taking any longer, enjoy the event.
Thank you, Livia.
Thank you so much, Livia. And thank you, Rizzoli, and thank you, Damiani, for putting this together, inviting me to speak with Joel. So for me, Wildflowers has always been my favorite Joel Meyerowitz book. It's not the one where I first discovered your work, but I feel it's this book of yours where I see more of you in it than in any of the other books. And I think part of that for me has always been this inherent optimism that's in the work and in the voyeurism and in the searching and the discovery, looking for what could be a wildflower, what could be photographed. And the thing that connects this set of pictures is you, Joel. You know, and in encountering Cape Light, St. Louis, The Aftermath, all these other books, which have also moved me and influenced so many, each of those has this connection to a specific time and place. And of course, you're inscribed in every one of those pictures. But somehow for me, Wildflowers has almost been like a thesis statement for how I understand you and how I've learned from you in terms of how to navigate the world with the camera and how to be open. And I'd love to hear, you know, from you in terms of the origin story of this, the original edition, you know, how that came about, where you were at in your life when that came together, and then rolling into rediscovering the work, re-editing it, adding to it, and moving forward to make this new edition.
Great, that's a rich program. And I'm sure we'll answer everything that you're suggesting. But I want to start off with something first, because you said optimism, and you said that this work sort of defines or describes me. You were able to see something about me, the person who I am behind the camera. And I really think that's what we all want. All photographers want to be able to say something about the world that they see and experience in the most personal, intimate way that kind of sums up a worldview. And that's a struggle for any artist, to find a way of bringing their persona into the work that they make so that the two things reveal each other. The world is revealed and the artist making it is revealed. And I think that I came up from childhood on as an optimistic person. My parents always said, yeah, go ahead, do it, you can. You know, we were a poor working class family, but nothing seemed to stop them. They said, do what you want to do. And my father was a joyous, comedic kind of street guy. It's called the mayor of the block. And he saw life as sequences of extraordinary but ordinary things in which they transform themselves from being ordinary into being something momentous in a split second, and then they're gone. And I think I must have understood something photographic from his perspective that I didn't know was photographic, but I understood it as life behavior. And so when I picked up a camera, photographing ordinary behavior on the streets that was so comical and quirky and crazy and prophetic and sad and beautiful, I mean, it was full of life, that I felt that kind of joy and optimism just being out there. And now, after 60 years of shooting, I realize when I ask myself, what have you done with your life, Joel? My answer is, I've been out in the world looking around, smiling and thinking, how lucky am I that I can just reach for all this positive energy and take it in and make photographs out of it.
Well, Joel, that's where I think you've been picking wildflowers your whole career. I think you've been going out there
Yeah.
again and again and
Yeah.
looking for, what's the best looking flower I can pick up from here
Yes,
and bring
right.
to that next destination, whether it's an actual photograph of something that has a flower in it, but just that's what I think. There's even just this premise of what is a wildflower, and what does it mean to go out and pick them and to bring them somewhere, and this is one thing too, where, I know you talked a little bit about the origin of this original book, and having this sort of moment on the light box, right? Because I think this thing, people are making more pictures than ever before. The task at hand isn't so much to make the pictures. The big task is what to do with them and how to see yourself in them in that second process of editing, sequencing, and turning them into something, right?
Absolutely.
And could you talk a little bit about that, sort of when Wildflowers started to sort of show its face to you as a way to organize a set of pictures?
Yeah. Well, I had done those two books you mentioned, Cape Light and St. Louis, but they came like 15 years after I began. I began shooting in color, 35 millimeter on the street, but that work never got out there because at the time, there wasn't a big appetite or market for photography. It was still thought of as something over there, like a craft, not an art form. It wasn't taken seriously, in color, even less. So when I had published those two other books, but I felt a kind of frustration, as if the work that I learned from, I couldn't get out there in a visible way. And one day while editing, as Gus mentioned earlier, on a Lightbox, I was editing something else, a commercial job, and I put aside a few pictures I made for myself, and I noticed that they had flowers in them, and I just shoved them to the top of the Lightbox. By the end of the day, and I must have looked at 200 rolls of film from the shoot, I had about a dozen or 15 pictures that had a kind of connection in them with a flower. And they weren't about pretty flowers. They were all about activities, but someone was wearing or carrying or whatever. And I thought, I wonder if I have other flower pictures like that, because I knew I did, but I wondered if there was enough in there that could hold together all of the interests that I had: landscape, people, portraiture, interiors, nighttime, still lifes, the things that we address as photographers because we have some curiosity through their photographic potential. And so we keep adding them to ourselves. And at this point, I thought, okay, I'm going to look for flower pictures. I had no idea what the dimensions would be. By the end of a couple of days editing, I had a few hundred photographs that were the tip of the iceberg. And I thought, this is a challenge. Can I make a book without making a fool of myself? Because I thought, oh, flowers, everybody's going to think it's such a sappy, sentimental, crappy thing to do. It's so easy. But on the other hand, the pictures weren't easy. They were quirky and funny and dark, and there was more than the flower. So I worked on trying to put together a string of images that moved me from one picture to the next through different phases of the photographic workout that we all put ourselves through. Every time we say, oh, look at that. And it's not what you photographed 5 minutes before, but now it's a sign on a building that's doing a crazy thing, and you like the light, all the reasons that spring to mind suddenly. And so I put that book together, and lo and behold, people liked it. And it gave me a toehold back into my own work, which was the original street work, not large format camera work, which is much more slow moving, meditative way of being.
It's I think of books relative to albums and musicians, right? Because they are these kind of, you have your freshman album, your sophomore album, and then there's those other tracks that then get released later that might be more authentically you in some way. or that because of where you're at in your career, you're able to make a different type of music that you kind of weren't allowed to because of publishing, because of commerce, you know, all these different conditions, right? And I think that what I love is that you chose to look back, you know, and you still believed in that set of pictures. And it wasn't just about staying forward just with the 8x10, but this other language of yours, you know, and again, I first discovered you through Naomi Rosenblum's A World History of Photography. And I think there was, you know, it was The Arrival of Color. And then there was, I think there was one St. Louis picture and one Cape picture. And I didn't know anything about the street work, you know, and then I got to know you and to see you with that camera and to understand, oh, he's doing that. It's the ballet, it's the movement, it's all of this that happens around making these other types of pictures. Should we dive in and look at you? We've got a deck of some of the pictures from, so why don't, I'm going to share the screen here so that people can see some of this.
Perfect timing.
Okay. So this is a deck of selection. This isn't necessarily the exact sequence from the book. It's sort of, you know, you put something together specifically thinking about this little conversation, right, Joel?
Yes, there's only a few pictures to look at because you don't need to see the whole book, but things that will spur you and I to have a conversation about work on the street, whether it's about wildflowers or, you know, parades or whatever. So she deserved to be the cover, I thought, because there's such a sweet innocence on her face and that smile and this crazy hat that she's made, you know, with a veil, with polka dots all over her, and that beautiful brooch on her jacket and that crazy fur collar. When you start to look at it, it's not just about the hat on her head, it's the whole thing. And it's quite a substantial portrait I made this when I was my second year as a photographer. So I didn't know anything yet, but I did have the instinct to get close enough to her and not draw her attention to me. I could have easily made her look at me or address me and done a formal portrait, but she was, you know, afloat in the world in a way, a dreamy person. And it was written all over her, including the dream on her head. And so it just was so lovely to discover that. And
was this the Easter parade?
Of course, the Easter parade, right? In the days before it was a spectacle that everybody came to photograph themselves in. It was a real parade of people just strolling up and down Fifth Avenue before and after Mass at the cathedral. And it was innocent. And people loved what everybody did. It wasn't a freak show. And it's become, if you've been to one in any of the recent years, it's like a freak show. It's like a circus on the street. And it is what it is. And it's always remarkable to see, but it doesn't have a kind of innocent sweetness that it used to have. It's very Instagram driven. You got to have it look a certain way, black, you know, blitz. So.
Is that full frame, Joel? I think it is. Yeah.
Just about. His feet are getting chopped off a little bit, but you know.
Opa, that's not what I wanted to do here. It's not. Let's see. Let me scroll down again. It wouldn't be Zoom without some little glitchiness here. Here we go. Okay, there we go.
Okay, it doesn't matter. We're going to lose things on the bottom of the frame. So, okay, I'll start. Then you and I can come in and out on this. You know, I was just walking the park in Paris, and it's springtime, and this lady walks into the frame carrying these flowers, and she suddenly, right in front of me, she seemed to dissolve like camouflage with the other flowers behind her. The space of her and the flowers in her arms and the flowers behind her just merged for a split second, and then bingo, I see Pan up above her, the spirit of nature in the woods piping along. And for that split second, the myth and the reality just gelled for me in a way, you know. And what is the picture about? Is it about recognition of the moment of camouflage, or about its mythic potential? I don't know, but I was alert enough in the moment to kind of feel the possibilities of those things in a split second, which is photography.
And this is also something that I feel so grateful to have heard from you so long ago, and to still try and practice. There's always this initial prompt. There's something that you see that just gets you in your gut. You know, it could have been sometimes it's just seeing anybody holding flowers. I mean, honestly, I have that on my list. You know, and I tell my students, if you see somebody out in the world holding flowers, that's a story. They're saying, I love you. They're saying, I'm sorry. They're saying, happy birthday. They're saying, get well. It's the nature of that prop implies either it's been received or delivered, and there's a narrative right there off the bat, no matter what happens in the picture. And then there's this thing, if you first see that somebody holding flowers, and then you see the rhyme of how it can integrate into the background, and then you push that to the side, and you keep looking for what else you can find, and then you discover Pan, and then you discover the other guy. And that way of working in the street, having an initial prompt that gets you, but then asking for more. How can you add more to it? You know, the Easter parade picture too. I mean, it's endless, right? Even back then, it's pure spectacle. But to still try and make a picture that shares somebody's humanity, that has that little extra moment, so it's not just about a hat, right? And I think it's both listening to these tugs at our emotions when we're out in the world, that make us leap, but then trying to interact with the world, to remember that this control we have with the four corners is very real in terms of how much more you can add to that first thing that you saw.
Yeah.
This is a picture I love. Tell me, Joel.
No, I was going to say, I think, you know, you understand this because you're a serious photographer, but a lot of people put a picture, make a photograph, or take a picture. I prefer make a photograph because that's what I think we do when we're using the four corners and we're holding things together. But a lot of people put something in the center and press the button as if they're shooting an arrow into a target. But photography is more generous and more demanding than that. It means in that frame, you can see the thing that you want, but you can also see the other things that are not related. Maybe some are, maybe some aren't, but you can start to jam. It's like, you know, it's like a mashup instantaneously in your vision. You can put more than one thing in the frame and make them work off of each other in surprising ways. And that's what I understood about photography early on. After making pictures in the center over and over and over again, I thought, how boring this is. It's so easy to put something in the center. It's much more interesting to put two things that don't work together, or maybe work in a new way in the frame. And like this, you know, I was on the street, by the way, with Gary Winogrand. We were both in Paris together, and he's over there somewhere to the left photographing. I don't know what he got, but I got this. And you know, watching the procession on the street in front of a church, and then seeing these two guys just going to shake hands, and the two women just about to kiss for each other. And then here comes the dead person into the scene, being carried by, but the energy and the dimension of the space, plus that explosion of flowers in the middle, gave this picture a kind of reason for being.
One thing I love about this whole body of work too, and also just the process, is that there's so much ritual, right? And flowers play a role in so many rituals, you know, and often so does photography too, you know. And there's a number of moments in here where you have this interplay of flowers and photography and spectacle, and the combination of these different things sort of being in play in life also seems to be a part of this work too. Here again, we have another, you know, great opportunity, right? How long did you follow this guy for? What came first?
I have to tell you, this is such a freak moment, and it has a wonderful story. I was once hired to do the advertising campaign for Puerto Rico. That's a big island, and you know, it's a lot to see, and I loved doing it because it took me all over the island. But I was in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and the art director and I are walking around. We're looking for locations to come back to. This is on the day we arrived, and we walk into this little plaza. And we're standing there looking, well, what's going on here? There's a statue of Ponce de Leon pointing, hey, okay, Queen, this is for you. We got this for you. And suddenly, as we're standing there, this guy on a unicycle comes in, whizzing right through the plaza. And lo and behold, he's doing the same thing as Ponce de Leon. And I couldn't believe my eyes. And I made a picture, and then I ran after him. I made another picture, but it wasn't quite the same, of course. But I caught up with him, and I hired him on the spot to come back the next day and be in the streets where we were working, so that I would have a bit of color coming through the streets. But this picture arrived on its own.
On the spot.
So it's another gift. It's a gift from the gods saying, if you're in the right place at the right time, stuff happens that you cannot believe.
Yeah. I always think if you just can dream about what you want to have happen, especially in a place like New York, and even if it's just, this would look better if a woman came by in a yellow dress, and then it comes, and at least you're ready for it. I mean, if you ask the world, that's where this time and space is malleable. It's not just the four corners, but if you know what you want to have happen, you're that much more ready for it too. I also like this one because yes, please.
No, go ahead. No, go. You go.
I was going to make a joke. I thought it was another Easter bonnet on this guy's head.
It plays a great role, like Carmen Miranda with her bananas.
So here again, one of these kind of ritual moments,
Yeah, I was traveling around on the Guggenheim grant that I had, and I was really going around America looking at the way leisure time, this is in the 70s, and leisure time was happening to the middle class, because the middle class really existed then, and they earned enough money to retire, and life seemed like it was okay back then. Of course, the Vietnam War was in the background, so my idea was, I'm going to look at people enjoying themselves while the war was going on, and they weren't paying attention to it. So everywhere I went, I looked for rituals that would bring people out to spend their leisure time as onlookers. And I was in San Diego, and they were launching a warship. And this was the captain and his wife and daughter. And I managed to just get myself to the front. I don't know how, I didn't have any permission or anything, but if you're a photographer with a curiosity, you can sometimes convince people without saying a word that you belong there. Just like this guy with the stogie in his mouth, and look at the camera he's using. He's using like a sheet film camera in 1971.
Amazing, yeah.
Flash and a 4x5, like Ouija, exactly like Ouija.
Yeah, with the cigar as well.
With the cigar. And so, I followed this because in a few moments they went up above and they cracked a bottle of champagne on the boat. So.
I mean, this to me also, it's another one of these of seeing one thing and imagining what could happen, right? And then there they are, out the window.
Yeah.
Rhyming.
And rhyming, exactly. And I felt like that when this is in a museum in Paris, and I went in the museum just walking around. I always have my cameras on my shoulder. And I step into the room, and there's this couple outside the window. I mean, look how close. You could sort of crack the glass and enter the room. It wasn't high security or anything. You could lift it. And as soon as I see them, and I look at the painting on the wall with the bouquet on the lower left, and I think, oh my God, life, art, what's imitating what here? The class is different, but the gestures and the spaces almost seem the same. You can't set this up, it comes to you if you're carrying a camera. It seems to me the camera's the license.
This is a favorite image. Anytime I see, it's like the most amazing loss of a hat ever. I have these two small daughters, and I don't know, maybe there's some other folks out there who are familiar with Richard Scarry's Busy Town. There's a character in this children's book series this little pig that always loses his hat. So he's always chasing his hat in the background like an extra. And whenever I see it, but my girls, we don't read this, but whenever I see it, I would think of this photograph. You know,
Makes perfect sense.
makes perfect sense, right?
Yeah.
But what a
Yeah.
gift, you know?
I mean, yeah. I mean, is this a picture about wind? Is this a picture about fashion? Is this a picture about the horse race that I'm attending at Longchamp? Is it about flowers? I mean, in a sense, the wind is the character. A sudden gust of wind is written by the flight of the hat and the way the women have turned into the wind to hold on to their hats, and the skirts are blowing. But there's also a kind of joyousness that life brings when nature gives a sudden jolt of unexpected energy, and everything changes for a split second. And if you have a camera and you're witnessing the change, it's like, what a gift. What a gift.
And it's also, again, it's the same thing. Like you go to the horse race, but you don't come back with a picture of the horse race, right? You go to the parade, but you don't come back with a picture of the parade. You know, it's always this anticipation for the non-event. You go to the event, but what you embrace is the non-event. But through photography, you turn it into something significant. You know, forever, these four figures will be negotiating that wind in that way, you know? And that's the thing.
Right.
I mean,
they're fixed. Yeah.
They're fixed. I mean, that's sometimes I think about these, you know, the friezes that are at the top of architecture, right? Where you see these figures head to toe, and they might be missing their heads or whatever because somebody stole that off. And you look at it and you know somebody spent time to make this to tell us a story, but we don't know what the story is anymore. And sometimes I feel like, you know, I have a set of pictures that often have people head to toe, that there's no inciting incident, but just for some reason, they're locked in a way that they're in dialogue with each other. I mean, here we know they're negotiating the wind, but there's just those moments where photography can bind things in a way. You were talking about this a little bit around the French funeral image, you know, the way you can take different things that don't belong together and then bring them into union in a way that is, you are really only uniquely the author of, you know?
Yeah. Well, you know, I notice in your pictures often a kind of balletic arrangement of things. And I would say this picture is like that too, in that the wind gave us the event in terms of the flying hat.
The score,
right?
Yeah,
the score. But the performance has a wonderful balletic interweave with it. And I see that in your pictures all the time. It's as if you anticipate the frame, the entirety of the frame, with the incidents and non-incidents that are playing together, but holistically they make up a whole new way of looking at the world. And it's one of the things that I I enjoy and admire about the work that you make.
Well, you're on the hook for delivering that in my direction. This was a new one, right? This was one that was not in the original.
Right. And it moved me when I came across it again. I thought, you know, this tone was absent in the book in a place that I felt it should be. And to see this blind woman on the streets tapping with her daughter sitting there holding the little, you know, whatever she has to entertain herself, sitting on the little suitcase. That they have to go out to do this. And the daughter is witnessing all these people looking at her mother. And then this boy with his little package in his hand is going into the building, and he has the most gracious gesture. You know, so all of a sudden the street had a kind of pathos and beauty at the same time, and generosity. And, you know, when you recognize these impulses in the public space, and it's not what you read afterwards, you read more afterwards, but in the moment, there's that fragile recognition that these are sympathetic things that are all happening at once. And if you learn to read the street, your sense of life gets bigger, because I'm recognizing all the little notes. I'm reading the score of the street or the text of the street in some way. And it's a big evolutionary jump photographically to get to a place where you're open and susceptible to the energies that are out there. That's what photography is really about. You know, I mean, it's sharing your vision of something. Don't you think?
I certainly do, Joel. And then it's also, I find it kind of moving and poetic to have that conversation, you know, while bearing witness, you know, to this, a blind woman who's there, you know, because navigating public space in a way that a photographer does as well. You know, I often think that there's a certain kind of affinity between street photographers and the people handing out leaflets on the sidewalk and the people selling hot dogs, that if there was a patron saint of that, we all have the same patron saint. You know, it's like we live and die by the grace and gracefulness of pedestrians going by, right?
And absolutely.
And being in, you know, like I'm sure you remember, there was the blind guy who used to be on the corner of 57th and 5th for forever with the pencils that I know everybody photographed. He's probably the patron saint of street photography. But
Sure.
But that, you know, again, it's also, it's finding invisible truths too, right? It is like, it's, you see the thing that gets you, and then it's trusting that there's some other things that are happening that you're not even overtly conscious of, but that you are feeling, right?
You're in contact with these things, but they suddenly crystallize into a definition for a moment for you. It's like meaning appears like it's a foreign language, even though we're all in it. We're not speaking that whole language, but we recognize elemental properties of it, and they give us this thing. So here it's,
yeah.
You tell me, Gus, you tell me.
Well, this is one of the new ones that you added that also, again, you know, the picture we saw previously, you know, with the door and the blind woman, that's a picture that was made in the same time period. That's sort of you revisiting work that picture could have been in the original Wildflower.
Yeah.
This is a picture that you made long after, right? And
yeah, recently, within the last 10 years.
And it's one of my favorite ones in terms of the additions, you know, for a couple of reasons. For me, it links to that, because I immediately register this as a funeral of some kind, right? And this emotion going, and especially even the way you prompted me with that blind woman on the previous image, and now we come to this image with this woman with her eyes closed. And then I think back to that picture of the funeral in Spain, not in Spain, but in Paris. And again, it's rituals, right? But the way that you made the picture, and I think you talked about, there was a tone missing, which was part of a reason why you wanted to introduce that picture that we just saw. And here, this is something I was talking with you a little bit about yesterday, you know, how have you worked, you know, Wildflowers in a different way? You know, how is your association with this picture as the man you are when you made this different than the young man that made that picture next to Gary in France?
Well, you know, I made this new version all during the COVID period. It was part of my work that I was doing inside. And I took longer than normal to put the pictures together. I don't know what it was. I think it was a certain kind of ennui that has probably hit all of us, but I also had a longer sense of time. And I wanted to make this book, here's a chance to re-edit my thoughts and drop out a lot of pictures that lost some interest to me or had other personal reasons that I no longer wanted to see them in the book. I won't go into that, but it offered me a chance to re-edit my language and change the pace and flow and add some things that I've learned in the 40 years or so since I made that book, to see if I could deepen the experience and if I could find a new rhythm threaded through it. Now, I have no idea if it succeeds or not, but I can say that I started out looking for the spaces that I could do that with. And by the time I ended, I felt like I had reconnected with the pictures, and I had also readjusted the pacing of them to maybe make a new kind of overall content. Because, you know, your book, Family Car Trouble, which I think is one of the most profound works of contemporary photography, because you really made literature with it. you're working within a known environment with characters that you work with and a funny asset of a car that breaks down. But you found the language within these contexts to keep on circling around the overall center of it. I have to work in this case with explosive materials from all over the world that make a weird sense when put together. They're held together by a thread, a fragile thread too, because the flower is almost nothing, you know. Can you build a picture about this flying flower or the guy kissing the flower? So to discover pictures like that and to see that they're like blocks of language offered me a chance to try to get to where you got with Family Car Trouble, into an intimate way of weaving these pictures together, not to tell a story, but to show the flow of possibilities through a body of work. It's sort of abstract, but it has a through line in it. And so that's what I was working with. And this picture, I mean, a close friend of mine had died, a director of the Getty Museum. And I was invited to give an oration at his funeral at a museum in Chicago that he was the director of for 25 years. And of course, because I'm a friend of the family, I was invited to come on the boat to spread his ashes. And these are his daughters and his wife is close nearby. And that's his brother who just poured the ashes into the sea. And he's now kissing this flower to say goodbye to his brother, as if the brother is the flower that he is now finally tossing overboard after the ashes. You know, that and the flying flower and the gesture of the thrower, I mean, all of it had this instantaneous photographic moment, you know, that's there and gone. And I don't know if it's well made or anything. It didn't matter. What mattered to me is that it's the symbol of the flower and the farewell. That worked for me.
Joel, you said so much in there that I think is so helpful and inspiring, but it's misleadingly, it's very sophisticated. Just this idea that you took this on as an opportunity to re-edit my language. And I think it's so important for all visual artists to register that you have a language. You don't just have pictures, good and bad pictures, you have a language, right? And you're in dialogue with the world. You're actually speaking that visual language when you go out and make pictures. And then you're speaking in it and learning it again when you're editing pictures. And then you're absolutely negotiating your language when you try to put that work forward to communicate something, whatever that is, right? As simple as an idea of flowers are enough, or in my own case with Family Car Trouble, to try and communicate this idea of there's things you can control and things you can't. But this idea of language and talking about language, and that we're not just photographers, we're sentient beings who are trying to feel things, witness things, understand things, relay that experience to others. And we might be relaying something profound, or we might just be relaying confusion. But that act, it's all language, right? So it's not just about good pictures. It's about registering, what can I say now? What's the, how much can I expose myself through this medium? You know, and I think this is something, again, this is why I love Wildflowers, because you have that open hand to stretch in any place, in any direction. It doesn't have to be Cape Cod. It doesn't have to be that, you know, and it really is this moment to just keep reaching for these kind of emotional associations or little quick photographic associations, but that you take us along on a walk in a way of bearing witness to the world, I think.
Yeah. Well, imagine, Gus, when I was making this book and I was just 40 years old, I saw it as a challenge to try to bring together all of my interests. And you know, I didn't know if I could sustain it. Photography is a mute medium. You know, you don't, it's not dynamic in that regard. It just sits on the page, and the viewer has to make something of it if there's anything in there that gets their attention. So for me, it was a big risk. but it was one that I felt was a challenge to the medium of photography. And I was determined to take up the challenge and make something of it. So, you know, that's what it's about, making risks while you're working. So look, I think I'll talk about this for a minute. We'll talk
Yeah, we
about
should
this,
push
but then
through.
I think we should push through, because there are questions people are going to have.
Yeah.
You know what? Let's push through. There's only a few more, everybody. So I want to show you a few things that are kind of quirky, right? You know, it's got flowers, but it's got ballet in it. And it works so well with the love of my life, doing a kick in her high-heeled shoes in some sexy hotel bedroom somewhere. I don't remember where we were.
I love those
Avanti.
additional maidens,
Yeah.
the additional maidens in the background, you know.
Yeah, that's right. With their fruits.
With their fruit.
Oh, this one I love. I mean, this is where you're going to be this year, Gus. This is Venice. And one very foggy morning, I was out early, and the mist was hanging low, and along comes this bouquet of death. He's taking it off to some funeral someplace. And just to see the ornate quality of the lights and the gondolas and the poles and the striding man, it was like I had to literally run after him to get it. Okay, come on, scroll on.
And then
Okay,
tell us about, because you have an exhibition that's about to happen. That's a kind of a significant moment from your career.
Okay, I'll be quick, because I think maybe it's a provocation to everybody today, because today nobody has an issue about the difference between black and white and color. But back in 1962, black and white was what serious photography was about, and color was amateur stuff for weddings and news magazines and things like that. And it wasn't taken seriously. Nobody could even print it because it was too demanding and too expensive. And I started with color, and after a year of shooting it, and I got all that resistance and pushback. Oh no, black and white is what we want to see. Black and white is art. But I thought, okay, I'm going to shoot black and white. But I couldn't quite wrap my head around it. And I wanted to see for myself, what was this reason for not wanting color? And so when I finally could afford a second camera, I would take two cameras, and if there was something slow enough that I could make a picture in a picture, I did. And that way I could compare them to myself later on and see, what does color deliver that black and white doesn't do, or what does black and white do that color doesn't? And so why don't we scroll through a few of these pictures?
Yeah.
So we'll see some very, very early. This is like 1964.
And for me, this pair, again, in that conversation of how much time you have, I mean, this is a sitting duck, right? This quilt isn't going anywhere. But even just the little way you framed up differently, the one on the right, giving me more of the graphics of the graphic design, and then the one on the left, I feel the breeze more than the graphics, so it's, again, just thinking about the change between the two.
Yeah. But you feel the color and the time of the day also,
yes,
which is really important.
Time of day.
And the time of day, because a picture, look, my feeling was photography describes what's in front of the person making the picture, and it's full of content. And if you print a black and white picture, you take away a lot of content. I mean, for example, in this picture, if you look at that blimp, the color blimp, if you look at the bottom of the blimp, what color is it? It's not gray. It's picking up the reflection from, now to me, that is earned content, as much as his belly and as much as where the horseshoe post is sticking in his shadow, which I thought was a good joke. But really, the black and white takes away the fake grass that we're standing on, and it takes away that incredible streak, that lick of color on the bottom. So to me, that became a defining moment about what I expected from photography and why color was more important to me. Little things like little things about the way the flesh of the baby looks in the box, the kind of mortified flesh of it. And I love the fact that the star in the shooting gallery is a little neon dab of color instead of just invisible. It's almost invisible in the other one. So, you know, there's always interesting things here. Okay, I don't have to talk about the rest because there's only a couple more, and we want to get on to some questions. So everybody, these pictures will be part of a show at the Tate Modern next year called Why Color. Okay, you got some questions?
First of all, thank you so much, Joel and Gus, because this was amazing, so inspirational, and I'm sure there will be a lot of people that want to ask questions. So to let you know, guys, you can ask questions to Joel or Gus through the chat tool on the bottom line of your screen, and I will read them to them. While we are waiting for your question, I would like to ask something to Joel. So you mentioned about all this work through New York street and what you also learned from the street. I was wondering if you still think that the city is the place where to be to catch this kind of situations. I mean, I know that you're now in Tuscany. I know I'm Italian. I know that kind of landscape very different. I fell in love with New York because of all that life, all happening together in that moment, in such a weird way. So I was wondering if this changing as inspiration for you or not.
Yeah, sure. No, it's a huge change because nothing has the density. Well, there are cities in the world, Peking, Beijing or Hong Kong, that have the density of New York and are chaotic, but nothing in Italy seems to have that. It does have energy. My nearest town, a big town, is Siena. I love Siena because it has a kind of, urban energy, but on a smaller scale. Mm-hmm. So what it does is the same stuff happens. Human beings are crazy wherever you find them. And they do ridiculous things everywhere they are. So, but it happens in a different context. The Italian context is, 1,000 years old. You're looking at medieval buildings or Renaissance buildings, and the colors are different. The scale is different, but it's just as interesting to try to see human behavior in a setting that is already historical. It gives me something else to work with. I can play off of the historical scale and tonality, because then the absurdity looks different than in a modern granite, steel, glass environment. It's just different, but a good difference, And I certainly made a lot of funny photographs of being over here because I, as an urban person from New York and from America and from big city, I can see interesting things in a smaller, more rural environment that's pleasant.
I'm sure we would be all, imagine, super interesting to see what is coming out from your staying in Tuscany. Listen, I have a first question from Paul. Do you have any other plans to release or re-release any other books from throughout your career, and why, if yes?
I don't have any plans for books that have been previously published to sort of redo them. But where I am now, I'm 83 years old. It's an opportunity to reconsider a lot of work that never got out there, because at the beginning there was no market for photography books, not like today where there are thousands of photography books. And so a lot of work that I did went into the files and didn't show itself, but I was still working on quirky subjects. So now is an opportunity, because apparently my books have sold well enough for publishers to believe that they could sell more. So it becomes worthwhile published. Like in Hollywood, you know, someone's a bankable director because their last film was a hit, and then they get money to make another one. So photographers don't get that kind of money, but at least if you get a book, you can have a chance. It's an opportunity to bring out work that I did in the urgency of my young years, in my discovery years, and show the young me how I worked and what I saw then. So that's a nice way of being at this part of my life. It's a chance to reflect upon the past, you know, and I'm gonna do it because there's a lot of stuff I'd like to see out there.
Listen, Joel, I have another question. After so many years taking pictures, this is also for Gus. Do you still feel like the sense of intrusion when you take pictures? I'm thinking the one at the funeral, for example, you know, it's a very moving moment for people. So being able to be there, being able to be respectful and taking a picture, I imagine the kind of, you know, energy is also for you. Do you still feel this kind of feelings, or now you are such a pro and encoder?
Well,
I don't know.
Since you said it's for Gus too, why don't we hear from Gus right now, and then I'll chime in afterwards.
You know, I think everyone who takes advantage of the lives of others to make their own work has a different way of negotiating that, and has a different criteria or threshold for how close they get, how aggressive they are, and also just strategies. It's a completely physical work. I'm a 6'5" privileged white guy from Manhattan. That's who I am. So I walk into a space, that's who I am, and I can take advantage of that, and it can also work against me. But I'm also someone who likes to smile. You know, one of the things that's been amazing in becoming friends with Joel is that any of us who've watched him photograph, you hardly see the camera because you see this big smile. You know, it's that joy. It's true. This and when you project that joy, and you project that interest and respect and towards what you're photographing, even honestly, even in a situation like a funeral, if you show that you're both present and that you're in dialogue with it in some capacity, emotionally, you hope, and then sometimes literally, you know, I love your shoes, beautiful hair, whatever, you know, that to open it up that way, I feel fine. And then when I don't, I'm not taking pictures. There's definitely scenarios that I've seen that I know, oh, my friend, whatever, would totally nail that, but it's not me. That's not my song to play, you know? And the same way there's other things that I can do that other people can't do. So it really is, again, some of this goes back to what Joel was talking about with language and this idea to understand your language. When you hear something that sounds important to you with your eyes and your heart, to move towards that and to sort of be in dialogue with it. I mean, it sounds like wubba wubba, but it's not, because you can tell, you know, animals can look at each other and very quickly size up if it's an enemy or not. And I think humans have some of that too. There's these this is why this life with masks has been so awful, because to be able to communicate with just a little gesture to somebody that you're not antagonistic and that you're benevolent has been challenging, you know? But yeah, so that's a long spiel, but Joel.
It's great. It's great. I don't have to really, Gus is saying it all for both of us, but I want to add one little thing just to the audience. And I believe Gus has gone through this too. Correct me if I'm wrong. When you're out on the street, you begin to understand that there's ways to make yourself invisible while being present. So you don't shrink away, but your boldness and your energy on the street, you find a way of expressing that in a kind, like Gus says, smiling or whatever it is, but you also find a way of making yourself invisible so that they accept you there, right in their space. And that becomes one of those balletic moves that photographers learn how to do, each of them in their own way, being present, but yet somewhat invisible. It's a real trick, and it takes a lot of time on the street to figure it out for yourself. So there's no easy answer for anybody. You have to figure it out for your body's, size and your facial expressions and your code of dress, everything has to be reconsidered for you to make yourself invisible. It's a big trick.
And
we're the Houdinis of photography.
Well, again, it's like the perfect street photographer is like, 5'8", I'm 6'5". It's like, they're like middle infielders. You look at Robert Frank, a Cartier, there's a certain height thing. And then you bring out the big guys and you have to have a different way of doing it. But on a related note is that I feel if you feel like you're doing the wrong thing by taking a picture, you're probably doing the wrong thing. And your audience will register that immediately. I tell people, again, it's students, you see, if you are stealing a picture from your hip and you get caught doing that, you are done. You are guilty. Because you didn't even have the cojones to hold it up and to be there and to be present for it. And you tried to steal something. So if you get caught on that, I mean,
you're done.
Lock them up. I mean, it's again, everybody has their strategies and there's different ways. There's people who've made amazing work that way, but they also have a different psychological set of tools to make that work be the right work for them. And there's no one way to do it, but you do have to have a strategy, and some of it is a mind game that you play with yourself. And then there's the physicality of it. So.
Then it evolves.
Sounds really magic. I have another question from Sean. Do you think some of that instinct that led you to photograph flowers guided your eye to photograph the way you did at Ground Zero? Some of the photographed wreckage looked morbidly like bouquet. Did you understand? Would you mind? Would you like me to read it again?
No. I get the gist of it. Well, they're very different, and the Wildflowers pictures are just moments that happened out in the world at large. Ground Zero was a huge documentary effort. And originally it was meant to have 6 photographers. Gus would have been one of them, and a video person and an oral historian taking stories. That was I created that project. I wanted the city to allow us to do it so that we could record whatever was going on in Ground Zero. But nobody wanted us to do that. They were saying photography was prohibited. And I thought, screw you. Worse, I actually thought, screw you, Mayor Giuliani, you fascist. And he turned out to be even worse. I'm going in there somehow, and I'm going to do this. So I had to actually consider all of the spectrum of what was necessary down there. The emotional spectrum, the physical spectrum, the site management spectrum, the human lives lost and others searching for it, the family. I had to look at everything and try to keep an ongoing record because it was disappearing. I go away at night, I come back the next morning early, 6 hours, 7 hours later, stuff was gone. The stuff I was just photographing was already gone. And so they were taking it away as fast as possible. So I needed to be on it. And everything looked like what it looked like. I had the reality of that place to deal with. But what was an asset and what was really important about doing it in color was that nature didn't give a shit for what happened down there. Nature was going to go through its seasons. It was going to shine its sun. It was going to send down its snow. It was going to put rainbows in there. It was going to have mist and fog. Nature was doing what it does in Lower Manhattan. And so things changed and looked so remarkable that I saw the kind of ineffable beauty in this place. And I knew that nature was the thing that was going to push this off stage, as it has done over the last 20 years. Of course, other things have come on the stage. We didn't get away cleanly from this. Just one thing followed the next. But our memories of that event are diminishing as 20 years put it further and further back in history. So the nature that I was witnessing there was unstoppable. And I thought, I'm going to connect to the nature because there are two realities. This thing happened and now it's being taken away and in this season. And so I was dealt an incredibly interesting hand to work with because there was real beauty there. And, you know, some people said, how could you make it so beautiful when it was a tragedy? And I thought, I'm not making it beautiful. It is beautiful. I'm just standing there saying, oh my God, it's unimaginably splendid right now, regardless of the storyline. So if the questioner, you know, is seeing floral something or bouquets, yeah, nature's bouquet using hard steel and busted concrete and smoke and all of that to make a new bouquet, I'm there.
But Joel, this was my thesis statement at the top of this whole thing. You've been picking wildflowers your whole life.
Yeah, that's right. The gifts.
You're out there embracing those flowers, you know, because why would you say no to it? Why would you say no to it? You know,
no. Life is offering us a constant scenic fragrance, right? And if we're open to it, we're gonna smell those roses and feel the import of whatever visual stimulation we see. And, you know, it's not for me to, you know, I don't say these things when I'm taking the pictures. I'm just welcoming the moment and saying, thank you for being so remarkable out of nothing, you know. And I recognize that. And over time, you know, you try to build sense through disparate means. It's like using words in a vocabulary in a fresh way. That's really all photography is. It's reallocating our attentive understanding of things in the moment to make ordinary stuff seem meaningful again. And each of the photographers that any of you like and follow, they must be doing that for you in some remarkably coherent or meditative or visual way that allows you to believe in them enough to go see another book of theirs or another picture show of theirs. Right, Gus? I mean, it's not what we do.
Yep.
Well, I must say thank you, because I believe that your words explain so well the power of your work, the privilege actually to listen to you and your way to see the world, because it's not that usual actually. And the way you see beauty, the way you are talking about what you saw in the pictures is just amazing. I'm really impressed, and I'm sure that everyone here is impressed and would stay here listening to you forever and ever. I'm actually thinking to make a format with you, Joel, talking about pictures with us through the year, because it was really amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You have to do it with Gus and me, though, because
of course
we can talk to each other, because we both share. Even though Gus is like 40 years younger than me, we share a belief in the medium of photography that's like coming from the same fountain. And so the joy that you see expressed on Gus's face is also in his work in remarkably contemporary ways. And I think it allows us to speak to each other in a way that is, we can communicate some of these ideas. There will be other photographers that don't feel this way at all. They have a whole other set of values, and that's what makes them interesting too.
Sure.
Even though we're the only ones that are getting it right.
But this is also, I just want to thank, you know, Rizzoli and everyone for doing this event. But Joel, you know, here's we all have to thank you, Joel, too, because it's the big thing is you made some great pictures, right? We all know the pictures, but to speak to what, you know, Livia is saying, and also just the way you have performed as a mentor and a teacher to the world, you know, and in some of cases directly right here to me, but again and again, I've seen you do this, do it on the screen, do it on the street, to transmit your joy and also to transmit that this is important and that this is significant and that this is enough and that this is a language and a way of understanding yourself and the world. It's not just about photography or what camera you use or any of that. It is about sort of, you know, I was a religion major in college, so I always go back to ground, path, and goal, right? So it's like the ground is this is where we are. And the goal is where we're trying to get to. And then we got to come up with a path. And those of us who have chosen to use photography and to walk the streets to figure out our way from the present towards that goal have learned
Beautiful.
so much from you in that capacity, Joel, you know, because really, I mean, again, your pictures are great, but it's really your passion and the way that you sort of inspire to think about life with a camera. So I'm so grateful for that.
Thanks,
You've turned the soil over and made so many things grow in gardens with so many different photographers. And I hope this new book is, the new edition is a great success for you. And I can't wait to see the tape as well. And again, thank you to Rizzoli and Damiani for bringing us together. Yeah.
I love you guys. I love you. Thank you. Thank you, Olivia.
Thank you. I want to remind to all our audience that your amazing book, Wildflowers, if you can show that again to the audience, is available in our bookstore on Broadway and 26, and is available online at rizzolibookstore.com. And I want to remind you that Joel was so nice to sign copies for us. So this is really an important opportunity to have something special and finally share Joel's approach and his deep vision of life and word and photography. So thank you again to all of you, and I hope you will enjoy the book as well.
Thank you, Olivia. It was great. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you for your questions.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Bye.